Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is my colleague, Forbes politics writer, Sara Dorn. Sara, thanks for coming on.
Hi, Brittany. Thank you for having me.
The Senate is set to hold a hearing Thursday on raising the debt ceiling since lawmakers are currently at an impasse over the debt limit. Can you first explain why this matters? What are the implications here if the U.S. defaults on its financial obligations?
So it's never happened before, so it's hard to say. And even the deadline that has been provided, there's this feeling that the government would still maintain a minimum cash balance at that point, and possibly be able to implement some accounting tricks to stave off a default until the next tax collection. However, Janet Yellen on Monday said that the new deadline for default for the government running out of cash and potentially defaulting on its debt is June 1st. And if that were to happen, if the government really did run out of cash and did not pay its debts, it would default on a whole host of financial obligations, including military spending, veterans benefits, Social Security payments, which are made 4 times each month, are one of the first things that would be affected. The political consequences, as well as the consequences for the economy as a whole, would be severe. It could prompt a market crash, a downgrade in the U.S. federal credit score, and really a recession. So really, really dire financial consequences being floated. So far, Wall Street is not really freaking out. There are some minor indicators, of a lack of faith in the Treasury Department or shaking faith in the Treasury Department. But as of now, lawmakers are under a 4-week crunch to agree to raising the debt limit. And there are a whole host of politics involved, which I'm sure we'll get into.
Oh, we definitely will, starting right now. What you're laying out is really a grim financial outlook if we don't raise that limit. So can you recap where we are in these negotiations? The word I keep using in my conversations regarding the debt limit is impasse, but can you describe what that impasse really looks like?
I keep using that word as well. Stalemate, deadlocked, running out of adjectives to describe it, honestly.
I know at
But
thesaurus.com, that's what I do.
the House last week passed legislation championed by Republicans who control the chamber that would raise the debt ceiling by $1.5 trillion through March of next year. It would also impose approximately $4.5 trillion in cuts in fiscal year 2024 across federal spending as a whole. And that provision, along with a number of GOP policy priorities, are what's causing this so-called impasse. The Biden administration has said that it will not agree to any debt ceiling measure that is tied to other issues, whether those be spending cuts or policy priorities. Meanwhile, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy is really beholden to this right wing coalition of lawmakers, given that he has such a slim majority in the chamber. And because during his speaker election, he agreed to a provision that essentially allows the caucus to oust him much, much easier than they were able to do so before. So at any point, lawmakers could bring a motion to eject the speaker. And so really his hands are tied, and that he is beholden to, again, and at the mercy of this right-wing coalition of lawmakers. So he's trying to protect his own speakership. And at the same time, Biden is trying to get him to agree to raising the debt ceiling without any spending cuts or other policy priorities attached to that. Now that the House has passed the bill, it is before the Senate. However, the Senate is also kind of taking a backseat on these negotiations. At least Senate Republicans are pretty united behind the idea that McCarthy and Biden need to come to an agreement, since Senate Republicans do not have the votes to pass the bill that recently went through the House as is. So any bill that the Senate did pass, even if for some reason Biden did agree to spending cuts, would have to go back to the House, unless, of course, and this is absolutely not going to happen, the Senate passed the GOP House bill, which went through the chamber last week. But that cannot happen, given that Democrats control the chamber, and even the most moderate Democrats in Congress have said that they disagree with many provisions of the House bill. So kind of a long and complicated answer, but there are a lot of politics involved in this. It's a very complex legislative and financial issue.
Despite what you said of Kevin McCarthy's speakership really being beholden by this further right group of lawmakers in the House, he's been the only one to really pass some sort of tangible action when it comes to the debt ceiling. Although Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer didn't mince words and said that this bill, the Limit Save Grow Act, was dead on arrival when it gets to the Senate. And Democrats essentially called it a ransom note. So what is Schumer doing in this fight?
So Schumer is following legislative procedure. He has taken steps to bring a clean debt ceiling bill to the floor for a vote. And he's also taken steps to bring the GOP House bill to the floor for a vote. However, both of those would require 60 votes to clear the filibuster threshold and actually be voted on. And neither pieces of legislation have those votes at the time. Now, Schumer is not actually expecting the Senate to pass the House GOP debt ceiling bill to raise the debt ceiling. That is more of a sign of goodwill that this bill can be used as a baseline negotiating tool in the upcoming budget talks. And that is what Biden and Democrats are advocating for. They want Republicans to negotiate any spending priorities that they have through the budget process and not through this, consequential debt ceiling negotiation, which, as we discussed, has, dire consequences for the economy if it does not pass.
Yeah, just on Monday, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said that the U.S. could run out of money to pay its bills as early as June 1st. Obviously, this sent alarm bells and shockwaves nationwide. But as you said, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, as well as President Biden, said that they will only agree to raise the debt ceiling without any other conditions. Are they being realistic here? Is it time to maybe come to the negotiating table with a little something else?
It's hard to say, and I really hate to make predictions in politics because you never know what's going to happen. But I don't think that Biden wants the alternative to McCarthy to become speaker. I don't know who that would be. But as we saw during the speaker's race, this right-wing coalition, House Freedom Caucus members, they really controlled that election, and they were the ones who were putting forward candidates who aligned with their politics. So I think that Biden prefers to have McCarthy as speaker and keep him there. And just knowing that, and knowing that passing any clean debt ceiling bill would not maybe only be impossible in the House, but if McCarthy supported that, it could threaten his speakership. I think that there will have to be some sort of agreement on, and maybe Biden comes out and makes a promise to agree to cuts during the budget. Maybe they work on a temporary extension, which lawmakers have dismissed at this point. But everything right now is being seen as a negotiating maneuver, and you don't really know how serious people are in saying what they are going to do. You don't know if they're going to stick to those commitments. Everyone is trying to play hardball right now. So there are a number of options on the table, but I think in the end, in order for McCarthy to stay speaker, the Biden administration is going to have to agree to something that the Republicans want.
In a conversation I had last week with a Forbes contributor, I asked him who is the winner and loser this week in this fight, and he said Kevin McCarthy because he's the only one to push through legislation. Another issue for Democrats has come up, and that's the Senator Dianne Feinstein's absence. Can you explain A, why she's been absent, and B, how this impacts negotiations and could be a win in the GOP's column?
So Senator Feinstein is 89 years old. She is the oldest lawmaker in Congress. She's been in the Senate for more than 30 years. She was diagnosed with shingles and has been absent from Washington since February. She has repeatedly said that she was going to return after the Easter recess. She said as recently as this week, she still plans to return, but her doctors have not cleared her for travel yet. Without Feinstein's vote, Republicans in the Senate only need one Democrat to join them in passing legislation. We saw this happen very recently, within the last few weeks, when Senator Manchin joined Republicans to vote to roll back some EPA rules on heavy truck emissions. And, there is talk that this could happen with the debt ceiling. But in order to do that, in addition to Manchin, Republicans would have to get 60 votes to clear the filibuster threshold. So they would need 9 additional votes along with Manchin. So that is still looking to be an unlikely probability, but it is something that's being discussed. And even Democratic senators, Amy Klobuchar, for example, have brought up the need for Feinstein to return in discussing the debt limit.
I know that Democrats were reluctant to talk about Feinstein's health, to, call for her to resign. But Congressman Ro Khanna of California, he was the first major Democrat to call on the 89-year-old to resign in mid-April. And this is what he tweeted in part: "We need to put the country ahead of personal loyalty. While she has had a lifetime of public service, it is obvious she can no longer fulfill her duties." So how have other fellow Democrats reacted to Feinstein?
There still have not been many who have called for her resignation. I mean, I think she has such a storied career and wide respect within the caucus that, people are really hesitant to do that. But this week, an additional lawmaker, Rashida Tlaib, House Democrat, came out and said that she believes Feinstein should resign. And that was in reaction to the Senate agreeing to roll back that EPA rule that limited heavy truck emissions. So also this week, in Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she had expressed support for Feinstein's resignation previously, but she came out this week in calling on her to step down. Now, as I mentioned, establishment Democrat, the coalition of lawmakers that we've talked about who have called for her resignation, Rashida Tlaib, Ro Khanna, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Dean Phillips is another. This is really a progressive coalition of lawmakers, but more establishment Democrats like Nancy Pelosi, for example, have defended Feinstein and Pelosi, for example, suggested that maybe even sexism is at play. And, she said that she's not seeing anyone call for the resignation of any men who are having health issues. So a lot of differing opinions here, but there is certainly not enough support among lawmakers on Capitol Hill, at least, to prompt for her to step down. But we don't really know exactly what is going on with her health, other than what her team is telling the public. And as I mentioned, they said this week that she's still being she's still waiting for clearance to travel.
So let's move to where we are right now. Let's go back there. And where we are is lawmakers are currently at deadlock, impasse, stalemate, choose the word, the synonym, and throw it in there. And the clock really is ticking for federal action on the debt ceiling. President Biden invited top congressional leaders, including Mitch McConnell, Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, and Kevin McCarthy, to the White House on May 9th to negotiate, to come to the negotiating table to hash out a deal of some sort. But you outlined some long shot outcomes for Forbes, including one that dates back to the Civil War. So can you give us a sense of what these look like?
Yes, so there is a provision in the Constitution that essentially states that the validity of the public debt shall not be questioned. This was a provision of the 14th Amendment, which was created after the Civil War to ensure that former slaves were guaranteed citizenship. And the amendment was intended to ensure that if the Confederacy did come back into power, that the United States could not repudiate its debt. However, the Biden administration and the Obama administration looked at this clause in 2011 and 2013 during the debt ceiling negotiations under that administration, in preparing to argue that the government can essentially issue debt past the $31.4 trillion borrowing limit. However, this is very susceptible to legal challenges, and it's unprecedented in the fact that no president has ever used this to continue issuing debt past the limit that is set by Congress.
Sounds long shot. I know you used the term unprecedented, and I know you don't like to predict outcomes here, but do you think that the solution looks like it could be more leaning towards bipartisanship or not?
Well, it has to be bipartisan because the House is controlled by Republicans, the Senate and the White House are controlled by Democrats. And if for some reason moderate House Republicans joined Democrats in pushing through what's known as a discharge petition, which allows lawmakers to bring legislation to the floor without committee approval, without the support of Speaker Kevin McCarthy, then McCarthy's speakership could absolutely be at risk. And as I mentioned earlier in our conversation, I don't think that that is something that the president or Democrats in either the Senate or the House want, because the alternative would likely be someone who, is backed by the House Freedom Caucus, potentially somebody who is even more conservative and extreme, not saying that McCarthy is, but that would be more conservative and extreme than he is.
Sara, thank you for the latest on the debt limit.
Thanks, Brittany.